I thought surviving the surgery would feel like victory, but lying there in that white room, I realized survival was only the beginning of a different kind of pain. The machines that had once kept me alive now sounded almost mocking, each beep reminding me of the silence waiting beyond their rhythm. I should have felt grateful, but what I felt instead was heavy, like carrying a truth I hadn't wanted to face. The nurse placed the discharge papers on the tray beside me, her voice soft. "Sign here when you're ready, Mr. Thompson. The doctor cleared you. You're free to go." Free. That word lingered, but it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like being pushed back into a life I wasn't sure was mine anymore. My bag was already packed. Just a few clothes, a book I never read, the glasses I'd used to pretend I could still focus on things other than pain. All that was left was a ride home. I reached for my phone. My hands trembled, not just from the weakness of surgery but from something deeper, fear of indifference. Still, I typed the message into the family chat. "Who will pick me up from the hospital?" I watched the screen, waiting for the dots to appear. First came my son's reply, "Call a taxi. I'm watching TV." Short. Dismissive. I read it 3 times, hoping I had misunderstood. Then Susan's words appeared below it, "Stay another month in the hospital. It's so nice without you." I stared at the glow of the screen until my eyes blurred. My chest tightened in a way the doctors hadn't warned me about. After 45 years of marriage, after raising a son, after giving everything I had to them, I was nothing more than a burden best left behind. The nurse peeked back in, smiling as though my silence meant I was fine. "Everything all right?" I forced a nod. "Yes." But everything was not all right. When she left, I pressed the phone against my chest and closed my eyes. The irony was sharp. I had been dead for 47 seconds on the operating table, yet it was here, in the land of the living, that I felt most invisible. They hadn't called once during my stay. No flowers, no visits, no concern. Just silence, and now rejection. I tried to remind myself of who I used to be. The man who had carried groceries into the house, fixed leaks, paid bills, solved every crisis quietly. I had thought my reliability earned me love. Now it seemed it had only earned me absence. My mind kept replaying their words. "Call a taxi. It's so nice without you." How easily they said it, how casually. No hesitation, no sign that it cost them anything. For a moment, I wanted to believe there had been some mistake, that perhaps Susan was joking, that maybe Scott was distracted and didn't understand the weight of his words. But deep down I knew better. Indifference has a way of showing itself long before it's spoken out loud. I had just been too blind to see it. I pushed myself up slowly, wincing at the tug in my chest. The painkillers dulled the worst of it, but moving reminded me of how fragile I had become. Each step toward the edge of the bed felt like a negotiation with my own body. When the doctor came in to check on me one last time, she smiled. "You're lucky, Mr. Thompson. You've been given another chance. Take it seriously." I nodded, but inside I thought, another chance at what? Returning to people who found peace in my absence? Going home to walls that remembered me but people who had already forgotten? I signed the papers slowly, each stroke of the pen feeling heavier than it should. The nurse folded them neatly and placed them in a folder. "Someone will come with a wheelchair to take you down," she said gently. "Thank you," I managed. My voice sounded thin, foreign. Alone again, I sat at the edge of the bed and studied the sunlight creeping across the floor. Outside that window, life carried on. Cars moved, people hurried, children laughed. None of them knew that a man had died and been revived just a few feet above the street. None of them knew that his family had already buried him in their hearts long before his body gave out. I picked up my phone one more time, scrolling through the messages of weeks past. The last one from Susan was about groceries. The last one from Scott was about money. Nothing in their words suggested love or even care. Just requests, reminders, convenience. The truth landed quietly. I had poured myself out for years into cups that never once filled mine in return. And now, when I was weakest, when I had nothing left to give, they had shown me exactly what I meant to them. Nothing at all. I leaned back on the bed, clutching the bag I'd packed myself. No one was coming. Not for me, not for the man who had kept them clothed, fed, and safe. I would leave this place the way I had lived most of my life, alone in what mattered. The knock at the door startled me. A hospital orderly stood there with a wheelchair. "Ready, sir?" I nodded, though nothing about me felt ready. As he wheeled me down the long hallway, past the rooms filled with patients whose families sat beside them, I lowered my eyes. The sound of their voices, the soft touches, the simple act of being present, it cut deeper than any scalpel. At the sliding doors, the cold January air rushed against my face. For a moment I inhaled it like a man tasting life for the first time. But the truth pressed back quickly. Survival meant nothing if you returned to an empty home, to people who wished you had stayed gone. And as I waited there for the taxi I had no choice but to call, I realized this wasn't just a discharge from a hospital. It was a discharge from illusions I had carried too long. The family I thought I had no longer existed. And maybe it never really had. The taxi carried me through streets I'd driven for decades, but nothing looked familiar anymore. Not the grocery store where Susan and I used to shop, not the park where I had pushed Scott on the swings. Everything seemed like a photograph left too long in the sun, faded, drained of meaning. I pressed my forehead lightly to the cool glass and let memory surface, uninvited. 45 years of my life began unspooling inside my head. I used to believe sacrifice was the truest language of love. Early mornings, double shifts, weekend overtime, those were the ways I spoke devotion. I thought each hour I gave to work was a brick laid in the foundation of our family. But looking back, it feels like I built a house they never intended to live in. In 1982, when Scott was just a baby, I sold the motorcycle I had dreamed of since I was a boy. I told myself it was for the crib, for the stroller, for the life we were building together. Susan kissed me on the cheek that night, whispering, "You did the right thing." I believed her. I thought love was about giving things up. The years rolled forward like that. Sacrifice after sacrifice, each one disguised as duty. Susan wanted a bigger kitchen. I worked longer hours. Scott needed tuition money. I cashed out the savings bond one had kept for retirement. Every time I told myself this was what family meant. Pouring yourself out until the glass was empty, trusting they would one day refill it with gratitude. But gratitude never came. Only more requests. By the 90s, I was running on fumes, climbing the factory stairs with knees that cracked louder than the machinery. I remember collapsing into the recliner one night, sweat still clinging to my shirt. Susan barely looked up from her magazine. "You worry too much," she said, as though my exhaustion was just another inconvenience she had to endure. Scott wasn't much different. When he turned 16, he begged for a car. I told him he'd have to save for it, maybe work weekends like I did at his age. His face hardened. "You're supposed to take care of me," he snapped, as if providing was my only identity. Against my better judgment, I signed a loan. That car was totaled within 6 months. He walked away without a scratch. I told myself that was what mattered. But really what mattered was that he never said thank you. The memories piled up like that, one on top of another, until they no longer felt like moments but proof. Proof that what I called love they called obligation. Proof that my devotion had been invisible all along. I remember once asking Susan quietly late at night when the house was finally still, "Do you ever feel lucky? Lucky for what we have?" She turned to me with tired eyes, her voice flat. "I feel like we should have more." Those words dug themselves into me, deeper than she realized. More. Always more. Nothing I gave, nothing I became was ever enough. As the taxi rolled past the old church where we'd married, I pressed my hand against my chest. Not because of the stitches but because of the ache. I remembered the way she looked at me that day, eyes filled with promises that seemed eternal. I remembered holding Scott for the first time, thinking I would die before letting harm touch him. 45 years had passed since those beginnings. And what did I have left? A wife who told me it was better without me. A son who couldn't pause his television show long enough to pick me up from the hospital. I whispered into the silence of the car, "Was I blind all this time?" The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "Pardon?" "Nothing," I muttered. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. The truth was settling over me like dust on old furniture. This wasn't betrayal that came suddenly. It had been building for years, brick by brick, comment by comment, neglect by neglect. Their cruel messages weren't new, they were just honest. For the first time they had said aloud what they'd been showing me quietly for decades. When we stopped at a red light, I caught sight of a father holding his daughter's hand, guiding her carefully across the street. She looked up at him like he was her whole world. I felt my throat tighten. At some point, that look had vanished from Scott's eyes when he looked at me. I hadn't noticed it fading. I was too busy working to provide the very life that erased me. I leaned back into the seat and let the memories keep coming. The late-night repairs to keep the house running. The vacations that were really just obligations disguised as leisure. The hours spent cheering from bleachers while Scott played Little League, him never once scanning the stands to see if I was watching. It hit me then, love isn't measured by how much you give. It's measured by how much they see what you gave. "Sir, this the right street?" the driver asked gently, turning toward my neighborhood. "Yes," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. The houses lined up like witnesses to my history. Each yard trimmed, each driveway holding stories of families whose love was maybe imperfect, but at least present. Mine waited just around the corner, a monument to 45 years of sacrifice that no longer meant anything. As the taxi pulled closer, I straightened in my seat, feeling the weight of my own truth. The messages on my phone hadn't just stung. They had opened my eyes. 45 years of devotion had bought me nothing more than silence. And as I stared at the place I still called home, I wondered if it had ever truly been one. The driver slowed at the corner and I told him to keep going. I needed a few more blocks of quiet to sort through the noise in my head. The city felt familiar and far away at the same time, like a life I had borrowed and never returned. He glanced at me in the mirror. "You want me to circle?" "Yes," I said. "Just a few minutes." It wasn't anger under my ribs. Anger burns hot and fast. This was cooler, heavier, like a stone I could finally see. For years I had carried it without looking. The ride made it impossible to look away. We passed a schoolyard. I remembered thermos coffee behind a chain-link fence while Scott played Little League. I never missed a game. He never looked up to see if I was there. I called it good parenting then. Now it felt like practice for being invisible. The driver cleared his throat. "Rough day?" "Rough decade," I said. "You coming out of surgery?" I nodded. "Triple bypass. Glad you made it." "Me too," I said, though the words landed dull. We rolled by the motorcycle dealership on Arlington Boulevard. Chrome caught a thin winter sun. I saw the bike I once wanted and the life I once pictured, short rides at dusk, a small garage, the kind of freedom that hums in the bones. I traded it for a crib and a second job. I told myself there would be time later. Later kept moving. "Want the radio?" he asked. "No," I said. "Silence is better." Silence had taught me how Susan's laughter got brighter when I wasn't around, how Scott's texts came only when he needed something, how my absence fit the rooms I paid for. At a red light, a father crossed with a toddler on his shoulders. The child squealed. The man steadied small legs without breaking stride. The ordinary care hurt more than I expected. "You got somebody waiting at home?" the driver asked, softer. "I have a house," I said. "I'm not sure about the rest." He nodded. "Families can be weather. Some days clear. Some days you hope your roof holds." "Mine leaks," I said. We both smiled, but mine faded. A bus rolled past with an ad that read, "You deserve better." I wanted to argue with it. To say deserve is a tricky word, the kind that keeps a man working himself thin. The light changed, the thought moved on. We drove 3 slow blocks in quiet. I thought about debt papers on kitchen tables, vacations canceled with easy phrases, a promise I once made to put them first no matter what. No matter what had arrived, and I was still at the back of the line. He turned down my street. I didn't stop him this time. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm sure," I said, trying the weight of certainty in my mouth. Houses sat still, winter lawns trimmed to resignation. Mine appeared, white siding dulled by January. From a distance it looked like every photo we sent relatives. Safe, stable, the kind of place where birthdays happen. I knew better. "Want me to pull into the drive?" "Yes," I said. "All the way." He eased the car up the concrete. I stared at the door. A stack of mail would be leaning against a bowl of keys. The study that used to feel like mine would be under a new layer of dust. "You need help with the bag?" "I've got it," I said. "But thank you." He printed the receipt and held it back to me. "Take it easy, all right?" "I will," I said. "One question." He looked over his shoulder. "Shoot. How much do I tip for quiet?" He smiled. "Quiet is on the house." I handed him cash anyway. "Keep it," I said. "Drive safe." "Good luck," he told me. "And hey, call someone if you need to." "I already did," I said. They answered. I stepped into the cold and closed the door. The taxi reversed and was gone. For a moment I stood in the driveway and listened to the shape of my life without engines or monitors. It sounded like wind and bare trees. I walked to the porch and set the bag down. The key felt heavier than I remembered. It had opened this door thousands of times. Tonight it felt like a test. I slid it into the lock and paused. The metal turned. Something in me did too. The key turned easily, but stepping inside felt like crossing into a stranger's house. The air was stale, carrying the faint odor of takeout containers that had sat too long. Mail was stacked haphazardly on the small table by the door, unopened envelopes leaning like tired soldiers. A bank statement, a utility bill, a bright red advertisement for a credit card. They had been here for weeks, untouched. I bent to pick them up, then stopped. My chest tightened, not from the stitches but from the realization that no one had thought to gather them, to prepare the house for my return. My absence had left no gap to be filled. I stepped further in. Susan's shoes were kicked off by the wall, one upright, one toppled on its side. Scott's sneakers, caked with mud, lay tangled next to them. No order. No thought. Just evidence of lives lived without pause, without care. The living room told the story clearer. My recliner, the chair I'd bought after working a year of overtime, was buried beneath pizza boxes and soda cans. The coffee table sagged under the weight of game controllers, half-empty bottles, crumpled napkins. The television glowed, muted but alive, like the heart of the house beating without me. I stood in the doorway and let my eyes move across it all. My home had not mourned my absence. It had celebrated it. They had filled the quiet with noise, filled the empty hours with indulgence. My sacrifice had not been missed, it had been replaced. I carried my bag into the kitchen, setting it on a chair that was already covered with folded laundry. The counters were sticky with spills that had never been wiped. The sink overflowed with dishes, bowls crusted with dried cereal, spoons cemented in place. The trash can bulged with cartons of expensive ice cream, imported wine bottles, takeout bags from restaurants I had never been able to justify spending on. My throat burned. All those years I had pinched pennies, patched leaky pipes myself, worked weekends to make sure bills were paid, and in 2 short weeks of my absence, they had learned to indulge themselves without hesitation. The sound of my own breath felt loud as I stepped into the hallway. I pushed open the door to my study, half expecting some comfort in the room I had always claimed as mine. What I found instead hollowed me out. Boxes covered the desk. Susan's craft supplies, half-finished projects stacked without care. Old computer towers and tangled wires dumped on the bookshelves where I had once arranged family photographs. Dust lay thick across the frames. I brushed a finger across the glass of one picture, our wedding day. Susan smiling in white, me in a suit too big, my arm wrapped tightly around her waist as though I could keep us together forever. The dust smeared across her face. I sat in the one uncovered chair, my bag still in my lap. The room was no longer mine, no longer sacred. They had used it as storage, as overflow, as space to fill with what they didn't value enough to display elsewhere. 45 years of my life, and the one place I thought was untouched had been treated like a closet. I whispered to myself, "This isn't home anymore." The words were quiet but they were true. From the kitchen, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the low buzz of the muted television, the careless rhythm of a house that had adjusted perfectly to life without me. I closed my eyes and the memories pressed in. Fixing Scott's bike in the garage when he was 10. Painting these very walls with Susan, our clothes splattered with color and laughter. Nights spent balancing checkbooks, saving for college, postponing dreams with the certainty that love would be enough. Now the walls felt foreign. The laughter erased. The balance broken. The front door creaked as if the house itself was reminding me, this was no longer mine. It belonged to their ease, their comfort, their indifference. I stood slowly, each stitch pulling against my chest, and walked back to the living room. The television screen reflected me faintly, a thin man with sunken eyes, carrying scars no one at home had asked about. The man who had worked for decades so this very room could exist. And yet, in its reflection, he looked like a guest. The phone in my pocket buzzed once. I pulled it out, half hoping it was Susan or Scott realizing I had come home. Instead, it was a bank alert. Another withdrawal. Another purchase made with money they had assumed would always be there. I let the phone drop onto the cluttered table, its screen lighting the emptiness of the room. The house wasn't broken. It was thriving. Thriving without me. And standing there, I realized that the surgery hadn't just given me a second chance at life. It had stripped away the last illusion I was holding. This wasn't my home. It never truly had been. The morning after I returned home, I sat in my study with the discharge papers spread across the desk. They were supposed to outline medication schedules, follow-up appointments, restrictions on lifting. But as I read them, all I could see was the outline of something else entirely. A beginning not of recovery but of release. For decades, I had signed papers to hold a family together. Mortgage agreements, college loans, insurance policies, promissory notes. Every signature was a promise that I would keep going, no matter what it cost me. Now the cost had been made clear. 45 years of devotion had bought me silence in a hospital bed. I opened the safe in the corner, the one only I knew by heart. Inside lay my will, typed neatly in blue folders, witnessed years ago when I still believed inheritance was the truest gift a father could leave. I unfolded it carefully, reading the words I had once written with pride. To my beloved wife, to my only son. The phrases mocked me. Beloved. Devoted. None of it had been real. I whispered into the still air, not anymore. The decision came without fire or rage. Just clarity. They had shown me who they were, and now it was my turn to respond. For years I had told myself family was everything. What I finally understood was that family is earned, not assumed. The next morning I called a law office downtown. A man named Jonathan Hale returned my message within the hour. His voice was calm, professional. Come by tomorrow. Bring your documents. We'll make the changes you need. Walking into his office felt different than walking into a hospital. There was no fear of dying here. Instead, there was the strange comfort of control. Tall windows looked out over Dallas, sunlight glinting off steel and glass. Shelves of leather-bound volumes lined the walls, the kind of books that held lives in their pages. Hale greeted me with a firm handshake. He was younger than I expected, silver hair at his temples but a steady, clear gaze. Mr. Thompson, I understand you want to update your estate plan? Yes, I said, my folder tucked tightly under my arm. Everything goes to charity. Nothing to my family. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't argue. That's a significant change. May I ask what led you to this decision? I thought about telling him everything in one breath. The texts, the silence, the 47 seconds on an operating table when my family was already living as though I were gone. Instead, I kept it simple. They abandoned me. I won't reward that. He nodded slowly, scribbling notes on a yellow pad. Then let's talk specifics. Do you have a charity in mind? I opened the folder and slid forward a brochure I'd saved from the hospital. The American Heart Disease Foundation. They funded research, supported families during operations, provided housing near intensive care units. In short, they gave what I had never received. This one, I said. Good choice, he murmured. For the next hour we went line by line. He explained how a charitable trust could allow me to remain in my home until I passed, how I could receive a small monthly income to cover my needs, how the rest would transfer cleanly to the foundation. Each clause, each detail felt like another layer lifting from my shoulders. At one point he paused. Would you like to leave them anything at all? A token? A small provision? No, I said too firmly to be mistaken. Then softer, they've had more than enough already. He studied me for a moment, as though measuring whether this was anger speaking or something deeper. You seem certain. I've never been more certain in my life. The final draft lay before me, pages spread like a quiet verdict. The witnesses entered, a pair of young paralegals, polite but distant. To them I was just another client making another change. To me it was the most important signature I had ever made. Hale pointed to the line. This will revoke all previous wills and codicils. Upon your death, your estate transfers directly to the American Heart Disease Foundation. I picked up the pen. My hand shook slightly but not from doubt. I pressed the tip to the paper and signed. One signature. 2 witnesses. 1 notary stamp. 45 years of sacrifice erased in black ink on white paper. Hale gathered the pages with care, sliding them into folders. You've given yourself peace, he said. And you've given a gift that will save lives. Lives that want saving, I said quietly. He handed me certified copies, their weight heavy but clean. The foundation may want to publicize this. If you're open, they'll share your story to raise awareness. I thought of Susan's message, stay another month, it's so good without you, and Scott's words, call a taxi, I'm watching TV. I thought of them sitting in the house, believing they had security for the rest of their lives. Yes, I said. Let them make it public. When I left the office, the air outside felt sharper, freer. The city hummed with its usual noise, but for the first time in months, my mind was quiet. Justice hadn't thundered. It had whispered through signatures, through choices. As I walked back toward the parking garage, the folder pressed to my chest, I realized something. For decades, my life had been about providing, about giving without question. But this time the giving would outlive me. Not to people who wasted it, but to people who valued it. And for the first time in 45 years that felt like enough. The story went public faster than I expected. By evening, Channel 8 ran a segment with my face on the screen, my voice steady as I explained why everything I owned would go to a foundation instead of to my family. The camera caught the house behind me, the study piled with boxes, the photographs on the mantel. The anchor introduced it as a story of generosity. But anyone who listened closely could hear the other truth: abandonment. That night, my phone lit up with call after call. Scott's number appeared first, then Susan's. I let them ring until voicemail cut in, their voices spilling into the speaker. Dad, it's Scott. We just saw the news. You can't be serious. Call me back. Another message, Buford, it's your wife. Stop this nonsense immediately. You're not thinking clearly. By midnight, the voicemails numbered in the dozens. Some were pleading, others angry. One even cracked with desperation, Susan's voice breaking as she said, "Where will we go? What will we do?" I didn't answer any of them. For years I had been their safety net. Now for the first time the net was gone. The next morning I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the winter air biting but clean. Through the window I saw them pacing inside, phones in hand, eyes darting to the driveway. They hadn't gone to bed. They were waiting, restless, rehearsing words they hoped would undo the truth. At 8:30 I opened the front door and stepped inside. They were already there, standing in the living room like defendants waiting for the judge. Scott spoke first, his voice too sharp. "Dad, what is this madness? We're your family." I set my coat on the hook, unhurried. "Family?" My tone was calm, almost gentle. "When I was in the hospital, did either of you call even once?" Susan folded her arms, her face flushed. "You know how hard it was managing everything without you. We were busy." "Busy?" I repeated. "So busy you told me to stay another month because it was so good without me." Her lips parted, but no words came. Scott tried again. "That was a joke. We didn't mean it." I looked at him. 67 phone calls last night, all after you realized your inheritance is gone. Funny how you can find time to call when money is involved." He flushed, shifting on his feet. Susan reached for my arm, her voice trembling. "Buford, please. 45 years of marriage, doesn't that count for something?" "It did," I said. "It counted for everything, until you showed me how little I meant to you." They followed me into the kitchen, their words colliding, anger mixing with desperation. I filled the coffee pot with measured calm, their voices rising behind me. Susan clutched the counter. "We can change. We'll be different now. We'll appreciate you." "For how long?" I asked without looking up. "Until the next time you need something? Until I'm too sick to be useful?" Scott's frustration broke. "You can't do this. I'm your son. This is my home too." I turned then, meeting his eyes. "When did you last pay a mortgage? A bill? When did you contribute anything besides demands? This house exists because I worked for it. You lived in it. That doesn't make it yours." He opened his mouth, but no words followed. The silence said more than anything he could have offered. I sipped my coffee and set the mug down carefully. "You have 24 hours to leave. Pack what you can. The rest stays." Susan gasped. "You can't mean that." "I've never been more serious." Her hands shook as she pressed them against her face. Scott muttered under his breath, pacing, but neither of them argued further. They knew. When I left for a short walk around the block, I gave them the exact time. 23 hours, 58 minutes, I said, stepping through the door. By the time I returned, boxes were stacked by the entryway. Susan wrapped dishes in newspaper with frantic movements. Scott carried monitors and game consoles to his car, sweat darkening his shirt. Their panic was real now. The house they had treated as permanent was slipping away hour by hour. From the porch, I settled into my rocking chair and watched them scramble. Neighbors slowed as they passed, their eyes curious, some nodding as though they already knew. The news had spread. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever given too much to people who never gave back. At 4 in the afternoon, Susan stepped outside, her hair tangled, her eyes swollen. "Buford, please. I wasn't thinking clearly when I wrote that message. You know I didn't mean it." I shook my head. "That's the problem, Susan. You never think about anyone but yourself." She broke into sobs. Scott tried anger next. "This is insane. You can't survive without us." I smiled faintly. 68 years, Scott. I think I'll manage." By 6 o'clock, both cars were packed. Clothes stuffed into trunks, belongings crammed into boxes. Some things they left behind, furniture, appliances, pieces of a life they assumed would always be theirs. Susan lingered by her car door, staring at the house as though it were a grave. "I never thought it would end like this," she whispered. "Neither did I said. "I thought you'd learn to appreciate what you had." They drove away with red eyes and clenched jaws. The driveway emptied, the house quieted. For the first time in 45 years, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. Inside, the rooms echoed differently. No television blaring, no arguments, no demands. Just space. Space I had earned. Space that was finally mine. I sat at the desk in my study, cleared away the boxes, and unfolded travel brochures I had hidden for years. Colorado. Arizona. National parks I had promised myself I'd see one day. One day had finally arrived. Karma had knocked and I had opened the door. Not with rage, not with vengeance, but with a quiet choice, to live the years I had left for myself. And for the first time in my life that was enough.